I'm going to share with you 6 key changes and mindset shifts that I made in my running to take me from having no idea to running a 2:35 marathon. These weren't overnight epiphanies either, unfortunately. These took years of hard slog, overtraining and underperforming, along with helping hundreds of runners one-on-one, from 3-time national champions to absolute battlers just wanting to get the most out of themselves. Along the time, I also got a PhD in sport and exercise science, so I have a fair in-depth understanding about how all these changes can be implemented by you to make you a faster runner from today. The first one is goals. When I started running, of course I had a goal. I was at university and I wanted to run under 40 minutes for 10K. That was just the dream. So how would I go about that dream? Well, once a week, I would try and run sub 40 minutes for 10K. Maybe not every week, because it would depend on how hungover I was. But if I wasn't trying to do a sub 40 minute 10K once a week, all of my runs had to be sub 4-minute Ks. And that was just how I went about achieving this goal. How else was I going to get there? I had no idea. I wanted to do the goal. I wanted to run under sub 40 minutes. So I had to run faster than that every single run. Otherwise, how would it work? How would I even be able to do it if I ran slower than that? So obviously, along the time and the years, I realized that that is not quite the most efficient and effective way to train. Now, it wasn't long after running under 40 minutes for 10K. I can't remember exactly how long it took me. It was some time over that year. Then I started to set more ambitious goals. And goals are great. They work well as a carrot and a motivator to get you going. But what I realized as I started to fall short of all of these goals was that I never actually had a plan as to how I would get to my goal. So that was absolutely the first thing that I did. The biggest change that I made was just, rather than just writing goals, I started to write a plan. Or actually, if I want to achieve a sub 40 minute 10K, what is it that is going to get me there? Probably 3 runs a week. I'm not going to run on Sunday. I'm normally hungover. So I started to piece together a plan, and I would enter a race. So the race then would act as like the end of the plan. I would just piece things together. So that was the first change, and that really made a difference. It gave me some kind of accountability, and it gave me a runway to trying to achieve my goal. That was number 1. Then moving on to number 2, I had this goal, right? Sub 40 minutes for 10K. Whether it was that, whether it was 38 minutes, whether it was an 18-minute 5K, they were all very fixed, absolute numbers. All these numbers, something like 18 minutes or 2 hours and 59 for a marathon, they're all absolute numbers. They're fixed. They are not relative. This was a massive change to my training. And I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was someone at the triathlon club when I went, and he said, I do some coaching. You need to start running slower. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you're trying to run with these faster guys. They can all run 33 to 34 minutes for 10K. At the time, I think I was like 37, 38 minutes. It's like every single session you're doing is at their speed, not your speed. That's way too hard for you. Now, it took me months before I actually realized the concept he was trying to teach me, because I just wanted to run with the fastest guys. And I'd end up not completing the session, being cooked, and subsequently having poor other sessions or having to skip sessions. And so it was that I realized that there is a relative intensity, and that is relative to yourself. And for me, in my system at the moment, like, I use the lactate threshold. So whether that's heart rate, pace, or power, but then you can operate at a percentage of your lactate threshold. So when everyone sets out on a run and they need to do some intervals, you can set a percentage of your lactate threshold. We know that for a half marathon, you're probably going to be operating at 95% of your threshold. For a lot of people, plus minus, sure. But you can measure this and you can see then that you are training at the appropriate intensity and speed or power, heart rate outputs that you require to make you a better runner. Then, along these lines, right, I got this. And it was around the same time that I got my power meter on my bike. So I was doing some triathlon training, right? And I had these relative measures. It really sunk in when I got a power meter on my bike, because you didn't really use heart rate when you were out doing cycle training, because you do such short intervals. Heart rate was so noisy. It would take a while to catch up and then you'd recover. You couldn't really rely on speed because of wind and elevation. So I got this power meter and I was like, oh, this is what I'm riding at when I'm, putting in this effort. It's 300 watts. I need to improve these. The number one thing I need to improve is my relative numbers. So the numbers I can ride at, say, 10, or let's call it 100% of my threshold, 120%, which equated to, 10 minutes or 5 minutes of ride time. And what I do is I just went out and tried to improve all of these numbers. Went on an online forum, got Andy Coggin's book around the training Bible, riding with power meter, whatever it was. I went out and I did that. And what I tried to do was just improve every single one of these. And I did. And then actually when it came to my race, and I'd planned for it, so I had it incorporated, I had relative intensities. When it came to my race, I was cooked because I improved everything within about 2 months. But my race was 3 months. My race was a long time away. I was planning short term. So this is short term versus long term. And this, in terms of a long term mindset shift, can be within a year or over multiple years. But it's more than your immediate block that you're in right now. And this mindset shift from short to long was a really important one for me, because I realized it's not just the next race, there's a race after that, a race after that, and actually years to come there's going to be more and more races. So as I started to think longer and longer term, I could make smarter decisions and plan for these accordingly. So with a long-term plan, a lot of you are going to be doing 2 core races in a year, whether that's marathon, half marathon, or even ultra marathon. But let's say it's a spring and a fall, like an April and an October marathon. You can't just think about the April marathon. You need to have in your back of your mind your November or your October marathon. And then even beyond that, what's the next April marathon? When we start to think longer term, we can start to plan and not rush our training to try and get every single ounce of improvement we need for the next race, when we know there's multiple races beyond that. So that one was huge. And it's what I really try to drill in to any clients who sign up with me, is that we're planning for the next one, not just this one. And that leads me on to number 4, guess. I would guess all of these things. I would guess when I was making a plan as to how much training I could handle. I would guess as to what I could handle for relative intensities. Could I do 7 times 1 kilometer at 105% of my threshold? Then I would guess as to what progress I could make over the long term. Sure, if I do all of this training, I have to improve, and I have to improve by 5 minutes over my marathon. In reality, I was guessing. I had no idea. One of the big changes was when someone introduced me to Training Peaks. It was a professor in the sport and exercise department, and it was actually when I was studying biochemistry, and I did a sport and exercise paper before I got into the postgraduate studies in sport and exercise. He goes, there's this new software, I want to show it to you. Do you want to play around with it? You're into this kind of stuff. So I started measuring all of my training. I got a Garmin, I think it was the 305 at the time, big chunky thing. And I started to realize what heart rates I was averaging, what distance and time I was averaging, not just across one session or a week, but across multiple weeks. And this is where measuring has a massive impact on your training and your planning and your progress, because it's an objective number. Look back, look over 6 months. What did you average in terms of your training time and your training distance and the amount of sessions you were able to achieve on average? If you're planning for 3 hard runs every single week, maybe you've got a down week, maybe you don't, but you've actually only ever been able to achieve 2 weeks of 3 hard sessions before 2 weeks of pretty average training, then there's no point guessing. that you should implement that into your plan. Then you can actually look at what relative intensities did you complete a lot of your aerobic runs? Could you make those faster or slower? What did you do a lot of your hard tempo or threshold sessions? Most of the time, those tempo and threshold sessions are actually threshold and VO2 max sessions, because a lot of people are doing the wrong relative intensities once they've been measured. And then what has been your long-term progression over whatever time or training block? From this marathon to the next marathon, regardless of performance, which we'll touch on in results, you need to know, hey, look, I'm able to get 5 seconds per K or 10 seconds per mile, 200 watts, whatever the number is, I'm able to make this progress if I implement 5 days a week, 2 hard sessions, sub-threshold with a long run. That measuring is going to give you honest, objective feedback as to how you can make a plan that is personalized for you and allows for continuous progress over the long term. So you're not just running around with no idea, you're actually able to make progress. That leads me to number 5, expect. I would go into these races, I'd do these things, right? I'd measure and I'd have a plan, but I'd go in and I'd expect to do well. I'd expect to do well at almost every single race. I'd stand on the start line, regardless if this is my A race, B race, C race, just a local club run, I would expect to be able to do well. I wasn't being honest with myself, because when I was honest, if I looked back, it wasn't just that I could measure my training and go, yeah, you know what, like I've done such consistent training and I've ticked all of my sessions and all of my numbers look great. And I'd go in and I'd go, yeah, how do I feel? And I would ignore that. I would ignore how I'd feel. And I'd also ignore where I was in my long-term plan. So I just expect, because I'm showing up, I'm doing the work, my numbers look good, I can just go and run a 10K as hard as I possibly can and hit a PB. But in reality, I would be really tired from doing a whole bunch of training, and I wouldn't have planned for the race in itself and how the race would fit into my long-term plan. Inevitably, what happened, besides one A race, which would be most of the time a marathon or an ultra marathon, every other race I would just expect to be performing like it was an A race, but ignoring what kind of training load I was under and how that race actually fit into my long-term plan. When I was able to do that and be honest with myself, look, I'm 10 days into a really hard block. Not only that is I've had a lot of travel, work's been intense, or study at the time had been really intense. Then I'd come in and I'd just expect to do well, but I'd never do well because I wasn't being honest with all of the factors that go into performance. And this is one of the things that I try to get runners to understand, is that you have to be honest. Even if you've done all of the training and everything looks good, if you had a very intensive week at work, a lot of travel, poor sleep, you can't expect to perform optimally. You have to be honest with yourself and make plans within the race as to a good, great, and potentially poor outcome, so that you are able to get, number 6, a result that you are proud of. And this is the other one, results. I'd look at every single result in it of itself. I didn't look at any other factors that were incorporated around the result. I just looked at, hey, look, I did all the training, I did the race, and I got the time, right? Whatever the time was. Let's say it's 39 minutes. I did it. I did 39 minutes for my 10K. I didn't really care how I got it. And then if I didn't get it, so let's say the next one was 38 minutes and I got 39:30 again, I would blame so many different things. I would blame anything I could think of. I would blame everything. You've seen them on Strava. Everyone's always got a good quality excuse banked up, ready for a poor performance. And a lot of people, they come to me and go, look, what did I do wrong? They haven't looked at their data. This is when I started looking at my data, objectively analyzing my races. I started to come to a better understanding as to what was a good performance and what was an underperformance. Because oftentimes a 39:30, when I was aiming for a 38, was a good quality performance when I encountered for the type of training load I was under, how I paced the race, how long or undulating or what kind of terrain or conditions we had. And when I analyzed the data, I could better interpret what that result meant and how I could feed that result back into my plan, how I could use that data and that result to give me better relative measures, set more realistic long-term goals, continue to implement measurements that allowed me to achieve or not achieve the data points that I got as a result of that race, and what to expect honestly of myself if I was to do another one of these races with this similar kind of training. And that is my 6 key changes that I've implemented to my running over the years that have taken me from having no idea to running a 2:35 marathon, getting a PhD, and helping hundreds of runners all around the world. Hope this helps. See you on the next one.